Ladies and gentlemen, this Red Gaming Tentacon video, we're going to be discussing the latest announcement from Valve. That would be the Steam Controller. Now, the Steam Controller has been designed to work with all of the games on the Steam library. That means, of course, the newer titles, but also the older ones as well. And how they've basically done that with older titles is that they've made the game think that you're playing with a mouse and keyboard, so there's obviously an API there to act as an intermediary. But it's very interesting because the controller looks extremely different from what you may be used to. One of the normal complaints that a lot of PC gamers will have if they're ever playing on a console is the analog sticks on a traditional joypad just really aren't up to the standard of keyboard and mouse in terms of accuracy, and this has been an issue that has been ongoing since even the original PlayStation. Another cause of concern, of course, has been latency, although that's becoming less and less of an issue. However, Valve have experimented for a long time, and they believe they've actually come up with a solution. So, out goes the traditional analog sticks, and instead we have trackpads which can be usable by your thumbs, of course, as you would expect. They are extremely high resolution, and they're also clickable, so in other words, you can use the entire surface as a button. And Valve are stating that the actual controller's resolution, in other words, how accurate it can detect inputs, is closer to that of a desktop mouse than what you would get with a traditional joypad. And one of the main purposes behind this is it would allow titles such as RTS games, which just haven't really been possible, space exploration games, various indie games, first-person shooters, and much more besides, to be far more playable. Now, most regular viewers on the channel may know I have issues with traditional Rumble. I just don't like it. I've never liked it since it was first introduced, way back when, on like the PS1 kind of eras when I first, got to use it, and I just didn't like it. I thought it was, it's just a joypad rumbling in my hand. It didn't add any sense of immersion to me whatsoever. And Valve have said that, one of the problems with trackpads, obviously compared to like a thumbstick, is that you're not really sure maybe how far you've pushed them. Now, a traditional rumble is created by a fairly simple mechanism. If you've ever opened up a joypad, say the Xbox 360 pad, you'll be fairly familiar with it. There's usually 1 to 2 motors, depending on how advanced the joypad is, and those motors will be connected to a small weight, which is lopsided. So in other words, only like half of it, for example, half of the 360 degree surface will have weight. So in other words, it will be like 180 degrees of weight, and the rest will be nothing. And the reason they do that is because it's lopsided, and as it spins, obviously it causes some wobble. Generally speaking, they have a smaller motor and a larger motor for the better devices, although PlayStation 4 and so on does this better. But it's not particularly that amazing. Valve, however, are going a completely different way. They are doing it via super precise haptic feedback, that's a quote, and how they're doing that is that they are employing dual linear resonant actuators, and these are basically small weighted electromagnets, and they are connected to the trackpads, which give a much greater sense of accuracy, direction of movement, and much more besides. Apparently, they are so accurate that they can even be used to play audio waveforms, for example, function as speakers, and much more besides. There's also a touchscreen in the center, and this whole surface is clickable, very much like a single button. And so it also is a high-resolution screen. Now, the purpose behind this is that it will support all games in the Steam catalog, and you will be able to basically map various actions to it. So it could be used, for example, for a scrolling menu, radio dial, extra information like a map, and whatever else, really. And it will overlay this data on top of the screen. Now, this could be very useful for certain titles that have inbuilt radio menus, for example, RTS games, or say the Elder Scrolls titles. It'll be very, very curious to see how this is actually implemented. Obviously, it's going to be a lot of work on Valve's part to make sure that it all runs smoothly, but if it does, then it could be pretty damn awesome. Now, for those of you who are left-handed, the great news is you can actually switch this in a controller configuration box, so you can switch between left or right-handed configurations extraordinarily easily. And the best part is there are going to be 16 buttons on the Steam controller. Half are accessible without you needing to even move your thumbs from the trackpads. They've also said that they will give a full catalogue of legacy modes which allow the controller to act as though it's a keyboard and mouse, and the Steam community can actually use those configurations and create and share the bindings for their favorite games. So in other words, you can then look at what a list of, say, the most popular bindings are, and then you could just get a quick start rather than needing to, say, create something from yourself from the ground up. And they've also designed the controller to be completely and utterly hackable. So this is an extension, if you will, of the Steam community and workshop. So in other words, they are actually going to make it so that there's tools available which will allow the users to participate in all areas of the experience. This includes, but not limited to, electrical engineering and the industrial design to actually fabricate them. So in other words, you're free to go out there and just do whatever the hell you want with this controller and use it as a base, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And there were some incredibly creative individuals there. And what are my thoughts on this? Well, holy crap. I wasn't really expecting such a unique design. I was kind of expecting, Xbox Pad or PlayStation 3 Pad 2.0. Not that there's anything wrong with those solutions, but I personally don't like gaming on Joypad when I have a PC because, as I've bitched to friends before, that it feels wrong. It's like I'm saying, okay, well, I don't like this complete and utter precision input, so I'm just going to throw that away, and I'm just going to use a controller. Now, okay, for certain titles, I don't care. If I'm playing stuff like Devil May Cry or whatever, then, fine. Even Dead Space, fine. Okay, it can be a bit annoying sometimes, with the accuracy, but generally speaking, it's okay. However, a first-person shooter, for example, it's just wrong. It just doesn't play right at all in RTSs. And one of the issues with playing certain games on PC with the Joypad is that you need to use a third-party piece of software to basically allow you to map functions and controls from a keyboard to a joypad. So it would be the equivalent of, let's say you use this piece of software, I believe one of them is called Xpadder, but let's assume that you want to use the analog stick to be able to move. Well, what you would have to do is map. So the keyboard, so you're basically mapping W to up on the left hand analog stick, which works, but it's a pain in the ass, particularly as obviously different games have different configurations. In other words, there's no unity there. You would basically have to map all the time, and it's just not really a smooth way to do things. It's doable, but for older games, it's far from ideal. Now, obviously, Sony have announced that the next generation PlayStation Pad, the DualShock 4, will be completely and utterly usable on the PC, which is great news in my opinion. Obviously, the Xbox One pad will be as an extension of the original Xbox 360 pad. I personally didn't really understand why Sony didn't make the DualShock 3s work. It was a bit of an oddity in my personal opinion, and also meant that some arcade sticks, for example the Mad Catz one, have a bit of a pain in the ass when it comes to functioning on PC as well. They are very picky on the chipsets. That you can just tell I've woken up, can't you? You could just tell. But anyway, they're a bit picky on certain chipsets, but it's starting to improve a little bit now. There are better pieces of engineering out there, and they can much better detect things. Of course, you could dual mod the pad, but that's not exactly off-the-shelf components. So I think PC gamers have wanted a decent solution. Obviously, this is a very big part of that. There's no point in sitting down in the middle of the living room and then still playing with keyboard and mouse, because what are you going to rest the mouse on? I mean, some people do, of course, use like a little table or whatever, but it's not really ideal. And so this is a great extension of that. I'm kind of curious how it handles, actually, because in my mind, it's like, okay, I understand where they're going with it, and I'm not arguing with their skill. I'm not arguing with their vision because I haven't touched it, but at the same time, I imagine it would take a little bit of a break-in period. I imagine it will be a couple of days, maybe a week or so, depending obviously how much you play it, to get used to the touch sensation. I imagine that you'll be kind of like, because obviously with the traditional analog stick, your thumb, you can kind of tell how far you've pushed it forward. With this, I'm not sure. I imagine it would not work well with fighting games, for example. I am completely guessing on that. But I imagine that certain titles it just, by extension, won't work well with. On the other hand, obviously you do have the option of, say, plugging in an arcade stick, or you have an option of plugging in, say, a PS3 pad or PS4 pad, whatever. So I imagine, in some ways, gamers are going to definitely appreciate having both. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed this lengthier than I expected it to be video. I will see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.